Something happened in your yard that you probably didn't fully understand when it occurred. Maybe it was the morning a bird landed closer to you than birds usually do. Not at the feeder, not where seed was waiting, but near you, where you were standing. As if the distance between you was the destination, not a mistake. Maybe it was the afternoon a chickadee followed you along the fence line as you moved through the garden. Not flying away, not watching from a safe branch, moving with you, staying near. Maybe it was something subtler than that. A cardinal who posted himself on the branch above the spot where you always sit on the back porch. Who was there before you came out and still there when you went back in. Not eating, not preening, just present. You noticed it. Something in you registered it as different from the ordinary bird in yard experience. And then you probably explained it away. Coincidence. The bird was just there. Birds do things for bird reasons that have nothing to do with you. But here's what you didn't know in that moment. What you were witnessing was the result of a decision. A real decision, made by a real individual, based on specific information that individual had gathered about you over a period of time that may have been longer than you realize. The bird had assessed you. It had run an evaluation, the kind of continuous environmental monitoring that birds perform for every significant presence in their territory, and it had reached a conclusion. You were worth staying near. Not just safe, not just neutral, worth something, worth the expenditure of time and attention and proximity that represents real cost for a prey animal who can never fully afford to stop being vigilant. And once a bird reaches that conclusion about you, something changes in how it behaves in your presence. Something that researchers have been documenting with increasing precision and that most people who love birds have felt but never had the language to describe. Today, we're going to give you that language. We're going to walk through exactly what happens in a bird's mind and body in the moment it decides you're worth protecting, what the signs of that decision look like, what the bird actually does about it. And we're going to end, stay with me, because the final segment changes the entire frame of everything that comes before it, with the moment that represents the deepest form of trust a bird can extend to a human being. Welcome back to Backyard Bird Mind. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave. What this community has built together in these comments, the stories, the observations, the things people share that they've never said out loud before, is something genuinely extraordinary. Hit that button and be part of it. Let's begin. What it actually means for a bird to protect something. Before we talk about what it looks like when a bird decides you are worth protecting, we need to be clear about what protection means in the context of bird behavior. Because it is not what most people imagine. When most people think of a bird protecting something, they picture dramatic behavior. A mockingbird bombing akat. A goose spreading its wings at a jogger who got too close to the nest. A crow screaming at a perceived threat from 3 houses away. Those be serious threats. The second is ambient protection. This is the category that most people have never thought about. And it is the one that, once you understand it, reveals something extraordinary about your relationship with the birds in your yard. Ambient protection is the continuous, low-cost, persistent vigilance that a bird extends to something it has classified as worth monitoring. It is the cardinal who positions himself above your favorite porch spot, not by accident, but because that position gives him a clear view of the approaches to where you are. It is the chickadee who tracks your movements through the yard from branch to branch. Not because you represent food or threat, but because you have become a known and valued quantity in his world, and your safety is information he keeps track of. It is the mourning dove who, when a hawk appears above the yard, does not simply flush and flee, but pauses at the edge of the garden bed closest to where you are standing before it goes. That pause is a choice. That positioning is a choice. That monitoring is a choice. And it is the kind of choice that birds make, researchers have found, only for things and individuals they have specifically decided are worth the cost. You may have been receiving this protection for months or years without knowing it was being offered. The evaluation process, how a bird decides you matter. The decision a bird makes about a specific human being does not happen overnight. It is not based on a single interaction or a single observation. It is the result of a sustained assessment process that operates continuously largely below the threshold of anything you would notice across every encounter that bird has had with you. Here is how that process works. Every time you appear in a bird's territory, every morning you step outside, every afternoon you move through the garden, every evening you sit on the porch, the bird is running an evaluation. It is tracking specific variables with a consistency and precision that we are only beginning to map fully. The first variable is predictability. Birds, as prey animals, are exquisitely sensitive to the difference between predictable behavior and unpredictable behavior. A human who appears at roughly the same times, moves in roughly the same patterns, uses the same spaces in roughly the same ways, generates a threat profile that a bird can model. A human whose behavior cannot be predicted generates a threat profile that cannot be modeled. Unpredictable entities are dangerous by definition, regardless of intent. Predictable entities can be assessed and classified. Every day you follow your routine in the yard. Every morning you walk the same path to the feeder. Every evening you sit in the same chair. You are reducing your threat profile in the eyes of every bird in that yard. You are becoming legible to them. And legibility, in bird cognition, is the foundation of trust. The second variable is response to bird presence. Birds monitor how humans react to them. A human who moves toward them too quickly, who makes sudden gestures, who stares directly with the fixed forward-facing gaze of a predator rather than the casual averted gaze of a non-threatening presence, registers as higher risk regardless of actual intent. A human who slows their movements near feeding birds, who avoids direct sustained staring, who allows birds to control the distance between them, registers as progressively lower risk over time. The first signs, what the decision looks like from the outside. The moment a bird decides you are worth protecting does not announce itself dramatically. It is visible only in retrospect, in the pattern of small behavioral changes that accumulate over the days and weeks following the decision. The first sign is positional. A bird who has decided you matter will begin choosing perch positions in your yard that are not simply convenient for the bird's own purposes, but that offer a clear view of your typical locations. The branch. Here's what to look for. The first sign is positional. A bird who has decided you matter will begin choosing perch positions in your yard that are not simply convenient for the bird's own purposes, but that offer a clear view of your typical locations. The branch that looks down onto your porch. The fence post nearest the garden where you work in the afternoons. The feeder hook that faces the back door. These are not random selections. Research on bird vigilance behavior has established that birds choose their sentinel positions, the high visibility post from which they monitor their environment, based on the specific threats and values they are tracking. A bird who posts himself above your chair is a bird who has placed you on his watch list, not as a threat, as something worth watching over. The second sign is alarm behavior directed on your behalf. This is the one that surprises people most when they first understand it. When a predator enters the yard, birds produce alarm calls. You have almost certainly heard them. The sharp, urgent chips of a chickadee, the loud, emphatic calls of a blue jay, the thin, high-pitched seat that small songbirds produce when a hawk is near. These calls are primarily directed at other birds, warning them of danger. But research on alarm call behavior in residential bird communities has found something remarkable. Birds who have formed a strong familiarity bond with a specific human consistently produce alarm calls at higher rates and for longer durations when that human is present in the yard during a predator event than when the human is absent. In other words, they call harder when you are there. The alarm they are producing is not just for other birds. It is for you. They are warning you specifically because you are a known individual in their community and the predator in the yard is a danger to known individuals. You may have heard this and not recognized it as what it was. The loud extended alarm calling that erupted from the oak tree while you were weeding the garden. The frantic chickadee chips that seemed to follow you down the fence line one afternoon. There was a hawk somewhere nearby, and the bird was telling you about it. The third sign is what researchers call escort behavior. As you move through your yard, a familiar bird will sometimes move with you, not flying away as you approach, but relocating to a branch ahead of you as you walk, then relocating again as you continue, maintaining a consistent close distance throughout your movement through the space. This behavior has been documented most clearly in corvids, where it represents active social monitoring of a valued individual. But smaller songbirds exhibit versions of it too. The chickadee that moves with you through the garden. The nuthatch that works its way down the trunk of whatever tree is closest to where you're standing. They are not following you for food. They are following you because they are tracking you. Because tracking you has become part of what they do with their attention. The science of bird alarm calls, what they actually contain. To fully understand what it means when a bird calls to warn you, you need to understand something about alarm calls that will permanently change how you hear them. Alarm calls are not simple. They are not just loud noises that mean danger. They are structured communications that contain specific, layered information that is intelligible to other birds and, in ways researchers are still mapping, potentially to anyone with the capacity to receive it. Research on the alarm calls of the black-capped chickadee, which has been studied more extensively than almost any other small songbird's communication system, has revealed an extraordinary level of complexity. The chickadee's alarm call. The familiar chickadee-dee-dee sound that gives the bird its name encodes information about the type of predator, its size, its level of threat, and its behavioral state within the acoustic structure of the call itself. Specifically, the number of D notes at the end of the call corresponds to the threat level of the predator. A small, highly maneuverable predator, a sharp-shinned hawk, for instance, the kind that can turn and strike quickly in close quarters, produces calls with more D notes than a large, slower predator like a great horned owl. The small hawk, counterintuitively, is the more dangerous threat to a small bird, and the chickadee's alarm call reflects this with acoustic precision. Other birds eavesdrop on these calls. Nuthatches, titmice, vireos, species that cannot produce the same call, adjust their behavior based on what they hear in the chickadee's alarm, responding differently to a high D count call than a low D count call. The alarm system is a shared language that crosses species lines. Now here is the part that changes everything about what you think is happening when your yardbird's alarm call in your presence. Studies examining alarm call behavior in birds familiar with specific humans have found that these birds consistently produce calls earlier at lower threat thresholds when a known human is present than when the yard is empty. A bird who would begin alarm calling when a hawk appears directly overhead will begin calling when the same hawk is still 2 or 3 trees away, but only when the human they know is in the yard. The earlier warning is for you. The lower threshold is because of you. The bird knows you cannot see the hawk at 2 trees away. The bird knows that you are large and slow and do not have eyes on the sides of your head. The bird knows that you need more warning time than another bird would. And so it calls earlier, because you are there, because you are in the yard, because somewhere in the accumulated experience of knowing you, this bird has registered that you are worth the extra call. The mockingbird defense, when a bird goes further than you expected. Most of what we've discussed so far is subtle. Positional choices, extended alarm calling, escort behavior, the ambient, continuous, low-cost protection that familiar birds extend to valued humans without drama or display. But there's a point past which some birds go further. And understanding why they go further, what it reveals about the relationship they have decided exists between them and you, is one of the most astonishing things in this entire field. The northern mockingbird is the most documented example in North American backyard birding of a species that extends active physical protection to humans it has classified as allied. Mockingbirds are ferociously territorial. They will attack cats, dogs, crows, hawks, and humans who approach their nests or who have previously threatened them. They remember specific individuals, specifically the threatening ones, and they will respond to the same threatening person weeks or months after the initial encounter. This has been formally studied. Research at the University of Florida demonstrated that mockingbirds could reliably distinguish between a person who had previously handled their nest and a person who had not, singling out the known threat for attack while ignoring nearby neutral individuals. The memory was specific. The response was specific. What you do that makes you worth protecting. At this point, you may be asking a reasonable question. What is it, specifically, that makes one human worth a bird protective attention while another is simply background? The research on this converges around a set of behaviors and qualities that are more accessible than most people realize. None of them requires special knowledge of birds. None of them require expensive equipment or significant time investment. They require something simpler and more fundamental than any of that. They require consistency. The single most powerful thing you can do to move from unknown presence to valued individual in the eyes of the birds in your yard is to be there. Regularly, predictably, without dramatic variation in how you show up. Dr. Jennifer Ulling at Cornell, studying bird habituation to human observers in urban environments, found that the critical variable was not what the human was doing, but how consistently and calmly they were doing it. Birds habituated most quickly to humans who were simply present, regularly, without dramatic behavioral variation. The human who sat in the same chair every afternoon for 30 minutes, doing nothing in particular, was trusted faster than the human who came out specifically to interact with birds. The birds in your yard are not waiting for a gesture. They are waiting for a pattern. And the pattern they are waiting for is the same one that tells every prey animal in every environment the same thing. This presence is safe. This presence has always been safe. This presence will continue to be safe. When that pattern is established deeply enough, the decision follows. And the protection follows the decision. The rarest sign, when a bird brings another bird to you. Everything we have covered today, the positioning, the alarm calls, the escort behavior, the physical defense, represents different points on a spectrum of avian trust. Each one is real. Each one is documented. Each one is something you can observe and recognize in your own yard if you know what to look for. But there is one behavior that sits at the far end of that spectrum. One thing a bird does that represents the deepest form of trust in its behavioral vocabulary. It brings someone else to you, not another adult, not a rival or a territorial neighbor. It brings its young. A parent bird who has spent the breeding season choosing a nest site, incubating eggs, feeding helpless nestlings, defending that nest from every threat the world has presented, and finally fledged a young bird into the yard. That parent bird now faces a choice about where in the territory the young bird should go, where it should learn to find food, which parts of the environment are safe and which are not. When that parent bird brings its fledgling to your feeder, something specific and extraordinary is happening. Research on fledgling introduction behavior in songbirds has established that parent birds do not bring their young to unfamiliar or uncertain locations. The first foraging sites of fledgling visits are the sites its parent has classified as maximally safe, the locations with the lowest predator risk, the highest food reliability, and the most consistently non-threatening environmental conditions. Your yard, if a parent bird brings its fledgling there, has passed every test on that list. But it goes further than that. Studies on chickadee family groups in residential areas have found that parent birds demonstrably adjust their alarm call behavior when introducing fledglings to familiar human presence. In yards where the adult birds had established high familiarity with the resident human, parent birds showed significantly lower alarm call rates when a human was near the fledgling than in yards where the human was unfamiliar. The parent was not alarming because the human was not a threat. The parent had decided that this human was safe enough to be near the most vulnerable thing in the parent's world. Your feeder has hosted fledglings, juveniles who still had soft edges to their plumage and begged loudly at their parents for food. You already know this. You have seen it. What you may not have understood in those moments was what the parent bird's calm, continued presence nearby was saying. It was saying, this place is safe. This human is known. You can be here. The parent was vouching for you. To the next generation. What it means to be someone a bird protects. I want to stay with you for a few more minutes because what I want to say now is the reason this video exists. Everything we have covered today is true in the most literal, documented, scientifically supportable sense. The positional vigilance, the extended alarm calling, the escort behavior, the physical defense, the fledgling introduction. These are real behaviors. They have been observed and measured. They happen in yards like yours, with birds like yours, in the ordinary, unremarkable dailiness of a backyard that you may have stopped thinking of as extraordinary. But I want to suggest something about what all of this means that goes beyond the biology. In a world where most of what is wild has learned to be afraid of us, and with good reason, a bird deciding that you are worth protecting is a remarkable thing. Not a small thing. Not a footnote to the more dramatic aspects of bird behavior. A remarkable thing. The bird has no obligation to you. It owes you nothing. Its survival does not depend on your well-being. From a strict evolutionary standpoint, the time and energy it spends monitoring your safety, calling to warn you, positioning itself to keep you in view, is time and energy it could spend on its own survival and reproduction. And yet it does it, because somewhere in the accumulated experience of knowing you, something shifted. Some threshold was crossed, and you moved from background to foreground, from unknown to known, from irrelevant to worth caring about. Dr. Mark Bekoff, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Colorado and one of the most rigorous voices in the study of animal emotion, has argued that the capacity to care, to extend protective attention to another individual at personal cost, is not uniquely human. It is a feature of cognitive and emotional complexity that exists across many species and that has been selected for across evolutionary time because it works. Because communities of individuals who extend care to each other survive better than communities of isolated individuals who do not. Your bird is not caring for you out of sentiment. It is caring for you out of something that functions like investment. You have become part of its world. Its world works better when you are in it. And so it does what creatures do for the things that make their world work better. It pays attention to you. It warns you when something is coming. It brings the things it loves most to the place where you are. That is not a small thing to be. That is, in the most honest language I have for it, a form of being loved by something wild. And the extraordinary part, the part that I think about when I sit in my yard in the early morning and listen to the alarm calls and watch the positioning and notice the small movements that most people have learned not to see, is that it has probably been happening in your yard for longer than you know. You have been watched over by something small and vivid and alive that chose you out of everything available to it and decided you were worth the trouble. The least we can do is notice. Before I go, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments, because the answers matter more than you might think. Has a bird ever warned you? Has there ever been a moment in your yard when alarm calling drew your attention to something you hadn't noticed? A hawk, a cat, something moving at the edge of the property that you wouldn't have seen without the bird telling you it was there? Or have you ever had the experience of a parent bird bringing its fledgling to your feeder for the first time and feeling, in that moment, something you couldn't quite name? Tell me, right out, every detail you remember. Because this community reads each other's stories, and something happens in these comments that I don't have a scientific framework for yet, but I know is real. People recognize themselves in each other's yards, in each other's birds, in each other's quiet, unremarkable, extraordinary mornings. If this video found someone who needed it today, share it with them. The person who has been sitting in their yard every morning for years and never knew what was happening around them while they sat there. They should know. Thank you for being here at Backyard Bird Mind. I'll see you in the next one.